Yeah, so a lot of this reminds me of, and you also mentioned Elon Musk, who runs the company Tesla. So it reminded me a lot of the historical scenes that you described between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison in the book, which are fascinating. If people haven't read or heard about that story, it's a very interesting part of history to read about. So the name Tesla today is very famous because of Elon Musk's car company. But the story of Nikola Tesla is a famously tragic one because his competitor, Thomas Edison, sort of won the battle in many ways at the time between DC and AC current. And I believe Tesla ended up dying in poverty. And sort of what's so curious there that I want you to comment on is, almost anyone who is probably knew them at the time or looks back on the history would agree that Tesla had the superior intellect and superior scientific mind. He was just, brilliant, almost savant-like person. But sort of Edison ends up winning in many ways. So what did Edison understand about marketing and power that Tesla did not?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're very right. Tesla was probably one of the great geniuses. He had like this visual imagination that was something uncanny, where he could see the workings of some elaborate machinery or motor in his mind and all the moving parts, and then he could put it on paper. A kind of eidetic imagery that is very, very rare. It is a savant-like power. Okay. The point that I'm making in that story, and that I make throughout the book, and that I make in all of my books, and I tell people, is that the talented, the creative, don't often win in the game of life, don't often win the power game. That often it's the ones who are the least creative, who are the producers of a movie and not the actual writers or actors, etc. They're the people who steal your ideas, who are waiting in the wings. You come up with something clever, they buy you out, like Google or Facebook will do, etc. So the creative, the talented, in many cases don't win because very talented, creative people like a Tesla are naive. They think that the world operates only by your talent, by your ideas, that results matter, right? And in an ideal world, if we humans were more like angels instead of primates, that is how things should operate, that a Tesla is rewarded for his creative thinking, for all his great ideas. And Edison, who was a good scientist, but was not on his level, would not be rewarded as much, right? But that's not the world we live in. So Tesla was easily duped and deceived time and time again by Thomas Edison, who understood that to be a successful scientist wasn't, this was a period in American history where inventions were incredibly important. And there was a very creative period in American history. Just think of all the incredible things like the phonograph, the telephone, the movie camera, things that Tesla himself were involved in. Just incredible ferment of these inventions going on at one point. But he realized that it doesn't help to have some great idea if you can't get financial backing, if you won't get people interested in it, if the public doesn't care. So if you get the public interested in an idea, where they're clamoring for this invention, then you'll find the investors. So it doesn't mean you can't be just like this scientist thinking that all that matters is my little notations on paper and my equations, etc. It has to have a marketing dynamic, right? So when he was trying to influence investors in the light bulb, which is probably his greatest invention, people thought it was ridiculous. It was very impractical. He would put on these shows for the press and for the financiers. They would show these incredible light shows showing them what a whole city. He would have the whole city, a model of the whole city of New York, lit up by this electric light, and he gave a visual impression of it. Well, that really impressed people, and then it created this momentum in the public and in the press that we need to have this product, right? So he understood that you had to have this element. And even he understood that if he had a rival, and there were other rivals on the scene doing light bulbs or who were still doing lantern lighting, that he had to crush them. He had to humiliate, he had to push them off the stage, that only he could have the attention. And so he played that game with Tesla in a very kind of cruel way. because Tesla was creating a different form of electrical charge. I believe it was DC as opposed to, I can't remember which. And Edison, to show that his form of his electrical current was unsafe, he had cases where animals were being electrocuted by that DC charge, as if people were going to be electrocuted if they bought Tesla's invention, which was totally bogus. But he created these very kind of amoral exercises to kind of turn people away from Tesla and think that only Edison's form of the electrical current was proper. On and on and on and on. And Tesla, who, as I said, was one of the most brilliant people in our history, he basically lived in poverty.
Yeah, so you draw this analogy between hunters and scavengers. You say at one point, they may have even been around the story of Edison and Tesla. The world of power has the dynamics of the jungle. There are those who live by hunting and killing, and there are a vast number of creatures who live off the hunting of others. You talk about vultures, for example, as a very successful scavenger in the world of animals. So what more can you say there about that analogy, especially from the perspective of how one would best protect oneself and prevent yourself from being tricked or conned by other people?
Well, everything in the game here, we keep coming back to this theme, is your level of awareness and your level of detachment, your ability to analyze and not taking things personally and not being so wrapped up in yourself. So realize that if you have an idea, somebody out there is wanting to try and steal it probably, right? And there are people like that who thrive, are not very creative, but are the people that are the money, the producers of something, etc. They literally thrive on scavenging other people's ideas. And I have that chapter in there called Get Other People to Do the Work, but Always Take the Credit, which on the surface is a very kind of cruel law. But I wrote that looking at it from the other side of the coin. So I had been working prior to writing that book in Hollywood. And Hollywood is an arena that absolutely depends on that law, where hundreds of people are doing all the dirty work, the electricians, the directors of the DPs, the directors of photography, the writers, the cast and crew, etc. But in the end, nobody ever hears about them. Nobody ever knows how incredibly creative perhaps the production designer was, or how the director of photography, how the great look of the film doesn't come from the director, it comes from this person. And only the actors and the director are getting the attention for it. They're the ones that get all the credit, right? And it happened to me time and again where I was working for a director and a writer, and I would write whole bits of dialogue for him because I was very good at dialogue. And nobody ever knew that. Nobody ever knew it. He put his name on it as if he had written the whole thing. And it was infuriating, and it was kind of humiliating for me, and it made me very bitter. And I realized later on, as I was writing the 48 Laws of Power, that being bitter and resentful was the wrong approach, that I was violating my own laws. That if I stepped back and I realized, first of all, this is part of the game. It's natural, it's normal in this environment. Just accept it, and just bide your time, and don't take it personally. Perhaps I could have made it clear to him that I was really good at this writing this kind of thing. And maybe he would have said, Robert, I want you to write a screenplay for me. And maybe I could have parlayed that into something powerful. But by being resentful and taking it personally, I closed off all sorts of avenues and strategies. So sometimes you have to accept the fact that this is the dynamic, that when you're young, people are going to exploit you. They're going to use your youthful energy for their own purposes. How do you deal with that? Can you deal with it not getting all emotional, upset, but sort of strategically, what can I get out of it? Maybe in my writing that dialogue, I was gaining some skills that I could use later on for my own purposes. And other times, you have to be very wary, and you have to understand that there are people out there who are going to steal my idea, who are going to buy my company out. You have to protect yourself. You have to find avenues of defense. You have to not be so trusting. A common problem that I deal with in my consulting work is somebody is looking for a business partner, right? And they hire someone who they think is very charming and very pleasant to be around and who has a good resume. They hire them in, and this person proceeds to steal the company from them, right? And if you had just been a little bit more wary and you realize that there are people like that out there who are looking to ride off what you build, maybe you wouldn't have been more careful in hiring somebody like that. So I just want you to realize that there are these sharks, these vultures out there, and to not necessarily not become paranoid, but the person that you're maybe partnering with, or that person who might be interested in your project, they might also be interested in stealing your project. That's the main idea.